The cabin lights flickered once, then died. In the sudden darkness at 37,000 feet, Daniel Hayes felt his daughter's hand tighten around his. Through the silence came a sound no passenger ever wants to hear, the crackle of the intercom, followed by a voice fighting to stay calm. "We need anyone with flight experience. Please identify yourself immediately." The Boeing 787 shuddered as hydraulic fluid sprayed against the windscreen 300 feet ahead, invisible to the 200 souls in the cabin. Daniel closed his eyes. 4 years. 4 years since he'd sworn never to touch a yoke again. But now, with Emma's sleepy breath against his shoulder and the aircraft beginning its uncontrolled descent into the black Atlantic night, the past he'd buried was clawing its way back. He reached up, pressed the call button, and everything changed. If you're watching from somewhere in this world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay with me till the end, because what happens next will leave you breathless. The flight attendant appeared within seconds, her professional smile barely masking the terror in her eyes. She leaned down close to Daniel, speaking in a voice meant only for him. "Sir, did you press your call button?" Daniel nodded. "I heard the announcement. I have flight experience." The woman's expression shifted from fear to desperate hope. "Please come with me, right now." Emma stirred against his shoulder, her small hands clutching the tablet that had been playing her favorite cartoon. At 7 years old, she'd inherited her mother's dark curls and Daniel's gray eyes, eyes that had seen too much sky and too much loss. "Daddy?" Her voice was thick with sleep. Daniel's throat tightened. He brushed the hair from her forehead, the same gesture he'd made every night since Sarah died 3 years ago, since the accident that had taken his wife and nearly destroyed what remained of his will to live. "Emma, sweetheart, I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that?" She blinked up at him, suddenly more awake. "What's wrong?" "The pilots need some help, and Daddy has to go talk to them for a little while. I need you to stay right here with Mrs. Patterson, okay?" He gestured to the elderly woman in the aisle seat, who'd been knitting peacefully until the announcement. Now her needles sat frozen in her lap. The older woman reached out immediately. "I'll watch her, dear. You go do what needs doing." Emma's lower lip trembled. "You're coming back, right?" Daniel cupped her face in both hands, memorizing every detail, the freckles across her nose, the slight gap between her front teeth, the absolute trust that lived in those eyes. "Always, baby girl, always." He kissed her forehead, stood, and followed the flight attendant toward the front of the aircraft. Behind them, passengers whispered urgently, phones emerging despite the regulations, prayers beginning in a dozen languages. The cabin that had been a peaceful cocoon of sleeping travelers 20 minutes ago now thrummed with barely controlled panic. The flight attendant, her name tag read Jennifer, walked quickly through business class, her hand white-knuckled on the seatbacks for balance as the aircraft shuddered again. The turbulence they'd experienced 15 minutes ago hadn't been turbulence at all, Daniel realized. It had been the aircraft's protest as something fundamental failed. "What happened?" Daniel asked quietly. Jennifer's voice cracked. "Captain Morrison collapsed. Heart attack, we think. First Officer Chen is flying, but..." She swallowed hard. "He's only been certified on this aircraft for 6 months, and we're losing hydraulics. Fast." Daniel's pulse kicked up. Hydraulic failure on a wide-body aircraft 30,000 feet over open ocean. The nightmare scenario that lived in every pilot's darkest thoughts. They reached the cockpit door. Jennifer knocked 3 times, a predetermined pattern. The door cracked open, revealing a young Asian man whose face gleamed with sweat despite the cool air. First Officer Michael Chen couldn't have been more than 26, and the terror in his eyes made him look younger. "You have flight experience?" Chen's voice carried the clipped accent of someone who'd learned English as a second language but spoke it with precision. 14 years military, F-18S, then transitioned to commercial. Logged about 4,000 hours on heavy aircraft Daniel paused. "Before I stopped flying." "When did you stop?" 4 years ago. Chen's face fell slightly, but he stepped back. "Get in here, now!" Daniel entered the cockpit and his breath caught. The instrument panel blazed with warning lights. A Christmas tree of red and amber indicators that told a story of cascading system failures. Through the windscreen, nothing but darkness stretched to infinity, stars above and the invisible ocean below. The altimeter showed 35,200 feet and descending. Captain Morrison lay crumpled against the left bulkhead, an oxygen mask strapped to his face. His chest rose and fell shallowly. A flight attendant Daniel didn't recognize knelt beside him, checking his pulse with trembling fingers. "He's stable for now," she said without looking up. "But he needs a hospital." Chen gestured urgently to the right seat. "Sit, please." Daniel slid into the first officer's position, his hands automatically finding the familiar positions: yoke, throttles, trim wheel. 4 years dissolved in an instant. The muscle memory remained encoded so deeply that his body knew what to do before his conscious mind caught up. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner. He'd never flown one, but he'd studied them during his final year at the airline. Modern, fly-by-wire, heavily computerized, and according to the cascading warnings on the screens before him, currently bleeding hydraulic fluid from multiple systems. "Talk to me," Daniel said, his voice shifting into the calm, clipped tone of a pilot working a crisis. "What's our situation?" Chen's hand shook on the yoke. 20 minutes ago, we heard a loud bang from the rear. Thought it was turbulence at first, but then the hydraulic pressure warning started. We've lost System 1 completely. System 2 is at 40% and falling. System 3 is holding for now, but I don't know for how long." Daniel scanned the displays. The aircraft's 3 independent hydraulic systems controlled everything: flight controls, landing gear, brakes. Losing them meant losing the ability to fly the aircraft with any precision. Flight controls? Degraded. We've got about 60% authority on the elevators, maybe 70% on the rudder. Ailerons are mushy as hell. The aircraft wants to roll left, and I'm fighting constant pressure just to keep us level. Daniel checked their position on the navigation display. They'd been en route from New York to London, 5 hours into what should have been a 7-hour flight. The mid-Atlantic stretched beneath them, the nearest suitable airport hundreds of miles in any direction. "What's your plan?" Daniel asked. Chen swallowed hard. "I declared an emergency 10 minutes ago. A TC is vectoring us toward Lajes Field in the Azores. It's the closest runway that can handle a heavy aircraft." Daniel pulled up the approach charts on the display. Lajes Field, a Portuguese Air Force base on Terceira Island that also served as an emergency divert for transatlantic flights. The runway was adequate, just over 10,000 feet. In normal conditions, plenty of room. But nothing about their situation was normal. Distance? 240 miles, about 35 minutes at our current speed and descent rate. Daniel did the math instantly. We'll be below 10,000 feet by the time we arrive. Maybe lower if we can't control the descent rate properly. "I know." Chen's jaw clenched. "But it's the only option. Shannon is another hour away, and I don't think we have an hour." As if to emphasize the point, a new warning chimed. Daniel's eyes shot to the display. Hydraulic System 2, now at 28% and dropping faster. "We need to reduce our speed," Daniel said immediately. "Every vibration, every bit of turbulence is working against the remaining seals. Pull the throttles back to 0.75 Mach and get us down to flight level 280. Denser air, more control authority." Chen nodded and began making the adjustments. The aircraft's nose pitched down slightly as they started the descent. Daniel felt the familiar sensation of his weight shifting forward against the harness. "Have you briefed the cabin crew?" Daniel asked. "Jennifer knows to prepare for an emergency landing, but I haven't told the passengers yet. I didn't want to—" Chen's voice broke slightly. "I didn't want to cause a panic until I knew for sure we could make it." Daniel understood the instinct, but they were past that point now. They need to know, and they need to prepare. When we land, if we land, it's going to be rough. The younger pilot's hands tightened on the yoke. "If?" "I need you to hear me clearly right now." Daniel turned to look Chen directly in the eyes. "We're flying a crippled aircraft toward an island runway in the middle of the ocean. We have degraded flight controls, limited hydraulics, and no guarantee that what's left won't fail completely before we get there. The landing is going to push every system we have to the absolute limit. So yes, if." Chen's face had gone pale, but he nodded. "What do you need from me?" "First, stop fighting the aircraft. You're muscling the yoke, trying to force it to do what you want. With degraded controls, that's just going to accelerate the failures. Light touch. Feel what the aircraft is telling you and work with it, not against it. Daniel watched as Chen consciously relaxed his grip. The aircraft's slight left roll actually decreased as he stopped overcorrecting. Better, Daniel said. Second, I need you to handle communications with ATC and the cabin. Keep them updated, keep them calm. I'm going to work on getting us the best possible approach profile for what we're about to attempt. And what are you going to do? Daniel was already pulling up the landing calculations on the flight management system. Figure out how to put this bird down with whatever we have left when we get there. For the next 10 minutes, Daniel worked in focused silence. He calculated approach speeds, factored in the likely configuration limitations, planned for every possible scenario. Without full hydraulic pressure, they might not be able to extend the flaps and slats fully. That meant a faster approach speed. Faster meant longer landing distance. Longer meant less margin for error on a runway surrounded by ocean. Behind him, Chen spoke in careful, measured tones to the Laje's tower, coordinating their approach. The Portuguese controller's accent was thick, but his English was clear. He was already scrambling emergency equipment, fire trucks, ambulances, everything they had. Daniel pulled up the weather at Laje's. Wind 270 at 15 knots, gusting to 22. Runway 27 available, almost directly into the wind. A small mercy. The crosswind component would be minimal. Lajes is rolling the equipment now, Chen reported. They're clearing the runway and shutting down all other traffic. Daniel nodded, his eyes fixed on the displays. System 2 hydraulics had dropped to 18%. The pressure was bleeding out faster now, approaching the point where the pumps couldn't maintain adequate flow. A new sound penetrated the cockpit, a high-pitched whine from somewhere aft. Both pilots tensed. What the hell was that? Chen asked. Daniel checked the system's page. Hydraulic pump 2 is cavitating. Not enough fluid to maintain pressure. It's about to fail completely. As if on cue, the whining stopped abruptly. The System 2 pressure gauge dropped to 0. 2 hydraulic systems down. 1 remaining. The aircraft lurched suddenly to the left, the autopilot disconnecting with a harsh warning tone as it lost the authority to maintain control. Chen grabbed the yoke with both hands, fighting to bring them level. "I've got it!" Daniel snapped, his hands joining Chen's on the controls. Together they muscled the aircraft back to wings level, but the effort required was enormous. Without the hydraulic boost, the flight controls fought them like they were pushing against concrete. "We can't hand-fly this all the way to landing," Chen gasped, sweat running down his temples. "We don't have a choice. The autopilot can't function without at least 2 hydraulic systems." Daniel gritted his teeth against the strain. "We'll trade off. 2-minute intervals. Keep the blood flowing to our arms." They established a rhythm. 2 minutes on the controls, 2 minutes off. It was brutally hard work, every second requiring constant pressure to keep the aircraft from rolling into a bank that could become unrecoverable. Daniel checked their position. 180 miles from Lajes, 28 minutes. 28 minutes might as well have been an eternity. Flight 447, Lajes Tower. The controller's voice crackled through the headset. "We have current weather. Wind 270 at 18, gusting 25. Visibility 10 kilometers. Scattered clouds at 3,000 feet. Runway 27 available and clear. Emergency equipment in position." Chen keyed the mic with effort, his arms trembling from the strain of holding the yoke. "Lajes Tower, Flight 447. Copy all. Be advised we have lost 2 hydraulic systems and are operating on System 3 only. Flight controls are severely degraded. Request maximum separation from all traffic and straight-in approach to runway 27. Flight 447, approved as requested. You are cleared direct to the ILS for runway 27. Maintain flight level 240 until intercepting the glide slope. All other traffic has been diverted. The field is yours." Daniel took control again, giving Chen a break. His own arms ached from the constant pressure, but the pain was familiar. He'd felt it before, long ago, fighting damaged aircraft back to carrier decks in conditions that made this look manageable. But back then, he'd been alone. Back then, Emma had been safe on the ground with her mother. The thought of his daughter sitting in seat 8A sent a cold spike of fear through his chest. He forced it down, Emotion had no place in the cockpit. Not now. We need to brief the landing, Daniel said. What's our configuration going to be? Chen checked the systems. If System 3 holds, we should be able to get partial flaps. Maybe flaps 15 or 20. Landing gear deployment is its own system, but it uses hydraulic pressure to lock. If we lose System 3 before we extend the gear, then we land gear up and hope the belly slide doesn't tear us apart. Daniel stated it flatly, without inflection. Facts, not fear. Can we do that? Land without gear? I've done it once. Different aircraft, but the principle is the same. Fuel dumps first to minimum landing weight. Then we come in hot and fast, keep the nose up as long as possible, and let the fuselage take the impact. The 787's composite structure might actually help. It's designed to absorb energy. Might? Chen's voice climbed an octave. I won't lie to you, Michael. If we have to land gear up, our odds of everyone walking away drop significantly. But it's survivable if we do it right. The younger pilot took a shaky breath. And if System 3 fails before we even get there? Daniel met his eyes. Then we ditch in the Atlantic and pray the emergency locator beacon works faster than the ocean pulls us under. For a long moment, Chen said nothing. Then he straightened his shoulders, and Daniel saw something shift in the young man's expression. Fear remained, but it was joined by determination. No, Chen said firmly. No ditching. We get to that runway. All of us. Daniel felt a flicker of respect. Then let's get to work. They descended through flight level 250, the altimeter unwinding steadily as they followed the program path toward Lajes. The island itself was still beyond visual range, hidden in the darkness ahead. Daniel calculated the fuel. They'd been burning it off naturally throughout the flight, but they still carried far too much for a safe emergency landing. Start dumping fuel. Get us down to minimum landing weight plus 30 minutes reserve. Chen activated the fuel dump system. Outside, invisible in the darkness, thousands of pounds of jet fuel began misting into the atmosphere, vaporizing into the night. Flight 447, Lajes Tower. We have you at 90 miles, descending through flight level 235. Intercept the localizer at 60 miles. Maintain 2,000 feet until established on the glide slope. Lajes, Flight 447. Roger. Be advised our fuel dump is in progress. We'll need approximately 10 minutes to reach landing weight. Flight 447. Understood. No delays. You're cleared for the approach whenever ready. Daniel checked the hydraulic pressure again. System 3 was holding at 82%. Not great, but enough. For now. Time to brief the cabin, he said to Chen. They need to know what's coming. Chen nodded and reached for the PA system. His finger hovered over the button for a moment, then pressed down. Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Chen speaking from the flight deck. His voice was steady now, Daniel noted with approval. As some of you may be aware, we're experiencing a serious technical situation with our aircraft. Captain Morrison has suffered a medical emergency and is receiving care. We have also experienced failures in multiple hydraulic systems that control the aircraft's flight surfaces. In the cabin behind them, Daniel imagined the ripple of fear spreading through the rows. Mothers clutching children, businessmen gripping armrests, Emma sitting with Mrs. Patterson, trying to be brave. We are diverting to Lajes Field in the Azores approximately 15 minutes from now. Emergency equipment is standing by. We need everyone to listen carefully to the flight attendants and follow their instructions exactly. Remove all sharp objects from your pockets. Take off your shoes. Know where your nearest emergency exit is located. When we land, it will be rough. Brace positions are mandatory. Chen paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a note of something Daniel recognized, the calm authority of someone who'd decided that fear served no purpose. I want you all to know that we have an experienced pilot helping us in the cockpit. We are doing everything possible to bring this aircraft down safely. Please remain calm, help those around you, and trust that we will get through this together. He released the button. In the silence that followed, Daniel imagined he could hear the collective held breath of nearly 200 people. That was good, Daniel said quietly. Chen's hands shook slightly as he placed them back on the yoke. I've never had to do anything like this before. In training, they prepare you for emergencies, but it's always just hypothetical. It stops being hypothetical the moment lives depend on you. Daniel checked their distance. 70 miles, fuel dump still in progress. But you're doing fine, better than fine. Just stay focused. 60 miles. The fuel dump completed, leaving them at minimum landing weight. The aircraft felt lighter, more responsive, or perhaps that was just wishful thinking. 50 miles. Daniel could see the faint glow on the horizon now. Lajes lit up like a beacon in the surrounding darkness. Landing gear, Chen said. When do we try to extend? Not until we're on final approach. If System 3 fails during extension, I want us close enough to the runway that we can still make it. We get one shot at this. 40 miles. The localizer signal appeared on their navigation display, a perfect electronic path leading straight to runway 27. Intercept the localizer, Daniel instructed. Nice easy turn. Don't stress the remaining hydraulics. Chen began the turn, applying pressure gently to the yoke. The aircraft responded sluggishly, but turned onto the inbound course. The magenta line on the display aligned with their heading. 30 miles. The glide slope indicator appeared, showing they were still above the descent path. Daniel called for gear down speed. Slow to 190 knots. Chen retarded the throttles. The aircraft decelerated, the nose wanting to drop. They fought it back to level. 20 miles. The lights of Laje were clearly visible now, a small island of civilization in the vast Atlantic darkness. Runway 27 stretched out ahead, marked by parallel rows of white lights. Glide slope alive, Chen reported. Daniel's hands tightened on the yoke. This was it. Time to commit. Begin descent. Follow the glide slope down. Flaps 15. Chen reached for the flap lever. The electric motors whined as the flaps began to extend. The aircraft shuddered, drag increasing, lift changing. Warning lights flickered but held. Flaps 15, indicating down and locked, Chen confirmed. 15 miles. They were descending through 5,000 feet, the island resolving into detail ahead. Daniel could see the runway clearly now, the approach lights beckoning them home. Landing gear down. Chen's hand moved to the gear lever. He pulled it down, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then a grinding sound resonated through the airframe as the massive landing gear assemblies began to drop from their wells. The hydraulic pressure gauge on System 3 flickered, 80%, 75, 70. Come on, Daniel muttered. Come on. The gear indicators changed. One by one, the lights turned green, nose gear down and locked, left main down and locked, right main down and locked. Gear down, 3 green, Chen called out, relief flooding his voice. 10 miles, 3,000 feet. The aircraft was established on the glide slope now, following the invisible electronic path toward the runway threshold. Daniel could feel the aircraft fighting him with every input. The degraded hydraulics made even small corrections require enormous effort. His arms burned with the strain. 5 miles, 2,000 feet. The runway grew larger in the windscreen, the white centerline lights marching toward them in perfect alignment. Flaps 20, Daniel ordered. The flaps extended further. More drag, more lift, more shuddering in the airframe. System 3 hydraulic pressure dropped to 65%. 3 miles, 1,000 feet. They were low enough now that Daniel could see the emergency vehicles lined up beside the runway. Fire trucks, ambulances, their lights painting the darkness in red and blue. Cabin crew, brace for landing, Chen announced over the PA. Behind them, flight attendants would be moving through the aisles one final time, checking seatbelts, ensuring heads were down, hands braced. Emma would be assuming the position, her small body curled forward, trusting that Daddy would bring them home. 2 miles, 500 feet. The runway threshold approached rapidly, the numbers painted in white on the black asphalt growing larger by the second. Daniel's hands moved constantly on the yoke, making tiny corrections to keep them aligned with the center line. The aircraft wanted to drift left, wanted to roll, wanted to do anything except fly straight and true. Airspeed 165, Chen called. 160, 155, 1 mile, 200 feet. The approach lights passed beneath them in a blur, the runway threshold ahead. 100 feet, the automated voice called out. 50, 40, 30, 20T, 10. Daniel pulled back on the yoke, raising the nose, flaring for landing. The aircraft responded with agonizing slowness. Come on, come on! The main landing gear touched down first with a tremendous jolt that rattled every rivet in the airframe. The aircraft bounced once, slammed down again, and Chen deployed the spoilers to kill the lift. "Thrust reversers!" Daniel shouted. Chen pulled the reverse levers. The engines roared, their thrust redirected forward to slow the aircraft. But only one reverser deployed. The other remained stowed, another victim of the hydraulic failures. The aircraft began to veer right, the asymmetric thrust pushing them toward the edge of the runway. Daniel stood on the left rudder pedal, fighting to keep them straight. His leg muscles screamed in protest. "Brakes!" he called. Chen applied pressure to the brake pedals. The wheels locked, rubber shrieking against asphalt. They were slowing, but the end of the runway was approaching fast. Too fast. 1,000 feet of runway remaining. 800. 600. Daniel pulled the emergency brake handle, activating the backup braking system. The deceleration increased, pressing them forward against their harnesses. 400 feet. 300. "We're not going to stop," Chen yelled. 200 feet of runway remaining. They were still going 40 knots, still moving fast enough to tumble off the end and into whatever lay beyond. 100 feet. The aircraft's nose wheel crossed the end of runway markers, the main gear still on the pavement. Beyond, Daniel could see grass, then a shallow decline toward the ocean. 50 feet. The main gear hit the grass. The aircraft jolted violently, the nose slamming down as the gear dug into the soft earth. They were still moving, still sliding, dirt and grass spraying up around them. 25 feet from the water's edge, the Boeing 787 lurched to a stop. For 3 full seconds, there was absolute silence in the cockpit. Daniel's hands remained frozen on the yoke, his entire body tensed, waiting for the aircraft to tip forward, to slide those final feet into the Atlantic. But it didn't move. "Engines off," Daniel said, his voice hoarse. "All systems off. Evacuate the aircraft." Chen's hands moved through the shutdown procedures with mechanical precision, flipping switches, pulling fire handles, securing everything that could be secured. Behind them, Captain Morrison groaned weakly. Still alive. The evacuation alarms began to sound, the automated voice commanding passengers to leave everything and move to the exits. Through the cockpit windows, Daniel could see the emergency slides deploying, people beginning to pour from the aircraft. He unstrapped his harness with trembling hands and stood. His legs almost gave out, the adrenaline crash hitting him like a physical force. "We did it," Chen said, his voice filled with wonder. "We actually did it." Daniel gripped the younger pilot's shoulder. "You did it. You kept your head, followed procedures, and brought everyone home. That's all any pilot can do." Chen's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. If you hadn't been here, but I was." Daniel cut him off gently. "Now go. Help with the evacuation. Make sure everyone gets off safely." Chen nodded and disappeared through the cockpit door. Daniel turned to the flight attendant still tending to Captain Morrison. "I've got him," Daniel said. "You go. Get yourself out." The woman hesitated, then nodded and fled. Daniel knelt beside Morrison, checking his pulse. Steady, breathing. The captain's eyes fluttered open, consciousness returning. "Did we—" Morrison's voice was a whisper. "Did we make it?" "We made it," Daniel confirmed. "Everyone's going to be fine." Morrison's hand reached up, gripping Daniel's arm with surprising strength. "Who are you?" "Someone who used to fly. Someone who forgot how much it meant." Daniel smiled wearily. "But I remember now." He helped Morrison to his feet, supporting the older man's weight as they made their way out of the cockpit. The cabin was nearly empty now, just a few stragglers at the rear exits. Emergency lights cast everything in an eerie red glow, and there, at the front left exit, holding Mrs. Patterson's hand, stood Emma. Her face was streaked with tears, her hair wild, her small body shaking. But when she saw Daniel emerge from the cockpit, her expression transformed into pure joy. "Daddy!" She broke free from Mrs. Patterson and ran toward him. Daniel released Morrison to a waiting flight attendant and dropped to his knees, catching Emma as she crashed into his arms. "I was so scared," she sobbed into his shoulder. I thought, I know, baby girl, I know." Daniel held her tight, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. "But we're okay. We're all okay." He carried her to the exit slide, settled her in his lap, and together they slid down into the cool night air of the Azores. Emergency personnel rushed forward, guiding them away from the aircraft, but Daniel barely registered their presence. He walked across the grass with Emma clinging to him, her legs wrapped around his waist, her arms locked around his neck. Around them, passengers were crying, praying, hugging strangers. The island air smelled of ocean salt and jet fuel. Daniel found a spot away from the chaos and sat down in the grass, still holding Emma. She pulled back just enough to look at his face, her small hands framing his cheeks. "You saved us," she whispered. "You saved everyone." Daniel shook his head. "I just did what needed to be done." "Like a hero." "No, Em. Like a father who couldn't bear the thought of not making it home to you." She buried her face in his neck again, and Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the solid ground beneath him, the warm weight of his daughter in his arms, the steady rhythm of her breathing. Behind them, the Boeing 787 sat crippled in the grass, its nose mere feet from the ocean. It would never fly again. The damage was too extensive, the aircraft too compromised, but everyone had walked away. That was all that mattered. As the emergency crews worked around them and the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern horizon, Daniel Hayes sat in the grass and held his daughter, and for the first time in 4 years, he allowed himself to feel something he'd thought was lost forever. Purpose. The sky had called him back, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to answer. The investigation began before the sun had fully risen over Terceira Island. Daniel sat in a cramped office at Lajes Field, Emma asleep across 2 chairs pushed together in the corner, her jacket bundled under her head as a pillow. Through the narrow window, he could see the crippled Boeing still resting in the grass beyond the runway, surrounded by investigators in reflective vests who moved around it like ants examining a fallen giant. Across the desk sat a woman in her mid-40s with severe features and eyes that missed nothing. Margaret Chen, no relation to First Officer Michael Chen, she'd clarified immediately, represented the European Aviation Safety Agency. Her tablet sat between them, recording every word. "Let me make sure I understand correctly, Mr. Hayes." Her accent carried the crisp precision of British boarding schools. "You haven't flown an aircraft in 4 years. You have no current certifications. You've never been type-rated on a Boeing 787. And yet you took control of a failing aircraft with nearly 200 souls aboard and made decisions that could have killed everyone." Daniel met her gaze steadily. "I made decisions that saved everyone." By whose authority? By the authority of being the only person on that aircraft with the experience to give them a chance. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "The regulations are quite clear about who is authorized to operate. The captain was unconscious. First Officer Chen was overwhelmed and deteriorating fast. The aircraft was dying around us." Daniel's voice remained calm, but steel crept into it. "What exactly should I have done? Sat in my seat and watched while we fell into the Atlantic? You should have allowed the qualified crew member to handle the situation. Michael Chen is 26 years old with 6 months on type." He was terrified, and he knew it. If I'd left him alone up there, he would have frozen or overcorrected, and everyone would be dead right now. Margaret made a note on her tablet. "First Officer Chen's competence is not your determination to make." "It was absolutely my determination to make when his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the yoke." "So you decided you knew better?" Daniel leaned forward slightly. "I decided that experience matters, that 4,000 hours in heavy aircraft and 14 years of military training might be useful in a crisis. I didn't want to be in that cockpit. I wanted to be in my seat with my daughter, pretending the problem didn't exist. But that wasn't an option." "Why not?" The question hung in the air between them. Daniel glanced at Emma's sleeping form, her face peaceful in a way that tore at his heart. "Because she was on that plane," he said quietly. "Because every child on that aircraft deserved their parents' best effort to survive. Because walking away from people who need help isn't something I can do, no matter how hard I've tried." Margaret's expression didn't soften, but something flickered in her eyes. She made another note. "Tell me about the decision to land at Lajes instead of continuing to Shannon." "Shannon was an hour away. We had degrading hydraulics and no guarantee the systems would hold that long. Lajes was 35 minutes. The math was simple. Simple mathematics that put you on a shorter runway with less emergency support infrastructure." Lajes has a 10,000-foot runway and full emergency services. It was adequate for our needs. Barely adequate, given that you ran off the end. We stopped with the aircraft intact and everyone alive. That's not barely adequate. That's success. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Success? Mr. Hayes, that Boeing 787 is worth over $200 million. It will likely be written off as a total loss. The airline's insurance company is already discussing liability. The runway damage alone will cost hundreds of thousands to repair. You made choices that resulted in millions of dollars in damage when a safer option existed. Daniel's jaw tightened. A safer option that would have put us in the ocean when the hydraulics failed completely 20 minutes before we reached it. I ran the numbers. I made the call. I stand by it. Based on what? Your intuition? Your gut feeling? Based on the hydraulic pressure degradation rate, the distance to each airport, and the wind conditions at both locations. Based on experience with damaged aircraft and knowledge of how quickly cascading failures accelerate. Based on keeping the maximum number of variables under my control for the maximum amount of time. Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying him. You sound very certain. I am certain. I was there. I watched those systems fail in real time. I felt the aircraft fighting us. Every mile we flew was a gamble that the remaining hydraulics would hold for 60 more seconds. Shannon was a bridge too far. And the landing itself, running off the runway? We touched down at the threshold, which was perfect given our approach speed and limited braking capacity. The asymmetric thrust reverser created a yaw moment I couldn't fully counter with degraded rudder authority. We veered slightly right, which cost us distance. The emergency brake system helped but couldn't compensate entirely for having only one thrust reverser. So you're saying the runway excursion was unavoidable? I'm saying it was the least bad outcome given the cards we were dealt. Would I have preferred to stop with 1,000 feet of runway to spare? Of course, but I'd take a runway excursion over a ditching any day of the week. Margaret made a longer note this time, her stylus moving rapidly across the tablet screen. When she looked up again, her expression had shifted slightly. First Officer Chen credits you with saving his life and the lives of everyone aboard. Michael did the hard work. He kept the aircraft flying long enough for me to get to the cockpit. He followed instructions under impossible stress. He's a good pilot who got dealt a nightmare scenario on an ordinary Tuesday night. He also says you were calm throughout, that you never showed fear. Daniel almost laughed. I was terrified every second. I just couldn't afford to show it. Why not? Because fear is contagious in a cockpit. If I'd shown panic, Michael would have panicked. If we'd both panicked, everyone would have died. So I buried it and did my job. Your job? Margaret repeated the word slowly. Mr. Hayes, you're not employed by the airline. You have no official role. What made you think that cockpit was your job? The question struck deeper than she probably intended. Daniel looked away, his gaze finding Emma again. She turned in her sleep, her hand reaching out as if searching for him even in dreams. 4 years ago I quit flying, he said, his voice rough. My wife died in a car accident. Emma was 4 years old. I was a mess. I couldn't focus. Couldn't trust myself to make life or death decisions when I could barely get through a day without falling apart. So I walked away from aviation completely. Took a job in IT support. Became a single dad who pushed papers and attended parent-teacher conferences and tried to pretend that the sky didn't exist anymore. Margaret said nothing, letting the silence draw him forward. But you don't stop being a pilot just because you stop flying. It's in your blood, in your bones. Every time I heard an aircraft overhead, part of me was calculating its altitude, its speed, its approach angle. Every time I read about an accident, I was analyzing what went wrong, what I would have done differently. I told myself I was done with it, that I'd made my peace with being ordinary. He turned back to Margaret, and she saw something raw in his eyes. Then the call came over the intercom, and I absolutely knew, that if I didn't answer it, everyone on that plane would die. Not might die. Would die. And I couldn't let that happen. Not to Emma, not to the other parents and children and people who just wanted to get home. So yes, I made it my job. Because someone had to, and I was the only one who could. Margaret studied him for a long moment, then set down her stylus. You violated numerous regulations, Mr. Hayes. You operated an aircraft without proper certification. You made command decisions without authority. You put an airline asset at significant risk. I did. And you'd do it again. It wasn't a question, but Daniel answered anyway, without hesitation. Margaret stood, gathering her tablet. The investigation will continue. We'll need additional testimony from you, as well as from First Officer Chen and the cabin crew. The final report will take months to compile. I understand. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Off the record, Mr. Hayes? She didn't wait for his response. My daughter was on a flight that experienced severe turbulence over the Pacific last year. The pilots handled it beautifully, brought everyone down safely, followed every protocol perfectly. When I met them afterward, I asked what they were thinking during the worst of it. You know what the captain told me? Daniel shook his head. He said, I was thinking that my daughter starts university next month, and I'll be damned if I miss her graduation. Not about regulations or procedures, about making it home to someone who needed him. Margaret's expression softened almost imperceptibly. What you did was technically illegal. It was also the only right choice. I hope the board sees it that way. She left before Daniel could respond, the door clicking shut behind her. He sat in the sudden silence, exhaustion crashing over him like a wave. His arms ached from fighting the yoke. His hands trembled with delayed reaction. His eyes burned from lack of sleep. Emma stirred, her eyes blinking open. Daddy? Right here, sweetheart. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. Are we in trouble? Daniel crossed to her and knelt down, brushing the hair from her face. No, baby girl, we're just answering some questions about what happened. The lady seemed mad. She's not mad. She's just doing her job, making sure everyone understands what happened and why. Emma's arms went around his neck. You were really brave. I was really scared. But you were brave anyway. That's what you always tell me brave means. Being scared and doing it anyway. Daniel pulled back to look at her, this small person who somehow understood more than most adults. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't always notice because I'm little. He laughed, the sound surprising him with its genuineness. Fair enough. You hungry? Starving. They found a small cafeteria in the base operations building, where off-duty military personnel and airport staff gathered for early breakfast. Daniel ordered scrambled eggs and toast for both of them, coffee for himself that tasted like battery acid but delivered the necessary caffeine. They just sat down when Michael Chen appeared in the doorway, still in his uniform, though it looked considerably worse for wear. His eyes found Daniel immediately, and he crossed the cafeteria with purpose. Mr. Hayes, I've been looking for you. Daniel gestured to the empty chair. Join us. This is my daughter Emma. Hello, Emma. Chen smiled at her, though the expression was strained. Your dad is a hero. Emma beamed. I know. Chen turned back to Daniel, and his face grew serious. I need to talk to you about the investigation. Later, let's just... No, now. Please. Chen's voice carried an edge of desperation. They're questioning my decisions, my competence. They're suggesting I should have refused your help, that I compromised the safety of the flight by allowing an unauthorized person into the cockpit. Daniel set down his coffee cup carefully. What did you tell them? The truth. That I was in over my head, that the aircraft was dying, and I didn't have the experience to handle it alone. That without you, we'd be at the bottom of the Atlantic right now. And what did they say? That I'm making excuses for my own inadequacy. That a properly trained pilot should have been able to manage the situation. That by admitting I needed help, I'm demonstrating that I shouldn't be flying heavy aircraft at all. Daniel's hands curled into fists under the table. That's bullshit. Maybe it's true. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Chen's voice cracked slightly. I've been flying for 6 years. I worked so hard to get here, to earn the right seat on a 787. And in one night, I proved that I don't deserve it. You proved nothing of the kind. I panicked. I couldn't handle the pressure. I needed someone else to save me. Daniel leaned forward, his voice intense but quiet. Listen to me very carefully, Michael. What happened last night wasn't about individual competence. It was about a catastrophic system failure that would have challenged any pilot, regardless of experience. You kept that aircraft flying for 20 minutes before I reached the cockpit. You maintained altitude, managed the descent, communicated with ATC, all while fighting controls that wanted to kill you. That's not panic. That's performance under pressure. But I couldn't have landed it, not alone. So what? You think every pilot who's ever faced a crisis handled it solo? Aviation is built on the concept of crew resource management precisely because no one person has all the answers in every situation. You recognized you needed help and you accepted it. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Chen's eyes glistened. They're going to suspend my license, maybe permanently. My career is over before it really began. Emma had been quietly eating her eggs, but now she looked up at Chen with solemn eyes. My mom died when I was little. My daddy couldn't fly anymore because he was too sad. But last night he flew anyway because you needed help. If you're brave like he was, you'll fly again too. The simple logic of a 7-year-old struck with unexpected force. Chen stared at her, then at Daniel, something shifting in his expression. She's right, Daniel said softly. This isn't the end of your career. It's the beginning of who you'll become as a pilot. Every aviator who's worth anything has a moment that tests them, that shows them their limits. You found yours at 26. Most pilots don't find theirs until they're too old to adapt. Use this. Learn from it. Come back stronger. What if they won't let me come back? Then you fight. You appeal. You retrain. You do whatever it takes. Because the world needs pilots who know what it's like to face the impossible and survive. Chen wiped his eyes roughly. Thank you. For last night. For this. For not making me feel like a failure. You're not a failure. You're a survivor. Remember that distinction. They sat in silence for a moment, the cafeteria bustling around them with the ordinary sounds of breakfast service. Then Chen stood, straightening his shoulders. I should get back. More interviews scheduled. He extended his hand to Daniel. Whatever happens next, I won't forget what you did. Daniel shook his hand firmly. Whatever happens next, don't forget what you did. You brought us home. I just helped with the final approach. After Chen left, Emma pushed her half-eaten eggs around her plate thoughtfully. Daddy, are you going to fly again? The question landed like a punch. Daniel had been avoiding it, pushing it to the edges of his mind where he didn't have to examine it too closely. I don't know, sweetheart. But you were good at it. Really good. Everyone says so. Being good at something doesn't mean you have to do it. Emma looked at him with those gray eyes that saw too much. Are you scared? Of flying? No. Of leaving me? And there it was. The real fear, laid bare by a child who understood her father better than he understood himself. Yes, Daniel admitted. I'm terrified of leaving you alone. Of something happening to me and you having no one. When your mom died, I promised myself I'd always be there for you, that I'd never take risks that might take me away from you. But you took a risk last night. That was different. We were already in danger. I was trying to save us. Emma set down her fork with a decisive click. Daddy, you're always telling me that being scared of something doesn't mean we don't do it. You made me learn to swim even though I was scared of the water. You made me go to school even when I was scared of the other kids. You said being brave means doing things even when they're scary. This is more complicated than... No, it's not. She fixed him with a look of startling maturity. You love flying. I know you do. I see your face when planes go over our house. You look up and you look hungry, like you want to be up there so bad it hurts. Daniel's throat tightened. Emma, I'd rather have a daddy who's happy and flying sometimes than a daddy who's always sad and on the ground. And I'm not going to be alone. I have teachers and friends, and Mrs. Patterson from the plane gave me her phone number and said I can call her anytime. I have people. You need to have the sky. He stared at his daughter, the small, fierce person who'd somehow grown wiser than her years allowed. When had she learned to see through him so clearly? You're 7 years old. You shouldn't have to worry about whether your dad is happy. I'm 7, not stupid. I worry about you all the time. You think I don't notice that you look at Mom's pictures when you think I'm asleep? Or that you sit in the garage sometimes just staring at nothing? You're sad, Daddy, and maybe flying would make you less sad. Daniel reached across the table and took her small hand in his. You make me less sad. You're the reason I get up every morning. I can be the reason you get up and the sky can be where you go. Both things can be true. The wisdom of children. It struck like lightning, illuminating truths he'd been hiding from. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Mr. Hayes, this is Richard Brennan. I'm the CEO of Transatlantic Airways. Daniel straightened in his seat. Mr. Brennan, I wasn't expecting to hear from you directly. I'm calling from New York. I've been up all night talking to our legal team, our insurance carriers, and the investigation board. I wanted to reach you personally before the media circus begins. Media circus? Mr. Hayes, you landed a crippled Boeing 787 with degraded systems and got everyone home alive. This is going to be international news by this afternoon. CNN, BBC, everyone is going to want your story. Daniel's stomach sank. I don't want to be a story. Unfortunately, that's not optional, but I'm calling to give you a heads up and to tell you something important. Brennan paused. What you did last night was extraordinary. The preliminary reports from the investigation are already showing that without your intervention, that aircraft would have been lost. You saved 183 lives, Mr. Hayes, including my goddaughter, who was in seat 12C with her mother. The weight of that statement settled over Daniel. 183 individuals, 183 families, 183 futures that continued because of choices made in a darkened cockpit. I'm also calling, Brennan continued, to offer you a job. I'm sorry, what? We need pilots like you, experienced, capable, calm under pressure. Your certifications have lapsed, but that's fixable. We'll sponsor your retraining, get you current again, pay for everything. When you're ready, there's a position waiting for you. Daniel glanced at Emma, who was watching him with bright, knowing eyes. Mr. Brennan, I appreciate the offer, but I haven't flown professionally in 4 years. I walked away from aviation for a reason. And last night you walked back to it for a better one. Mr. Hayes, I've been in this business for 30 years. I know talent when I see it. More importantly, I know character. What you did wasn't just about skill. It was about courage and decision-making and the willingness to step up when everything is on the line. That's not something you can teach in a simulator. I have a daughter, responsibilities. I have 3 kids myself. I understand. That's why I'm offering flexibility, part-time if you want it. Reserve status, work around your parenting schedule, whatever you need. But don't walk away from who you are because you're afraid of who you might have to become. Emma squeezed Daniel's hand. When he looked at her, she nodded encouragingly. Can I think about it? Daniel asked. Take all the time you need, but Mr. Hayes, the sky is where you belong. Last night proved that. Don't let fear keep you grounded when you were born to fly. The call ended. Daniel set down the phone and looked at his daughter. You heard that? Most of it. Are you going to do it? I don't know. It's complicated. You always say that when you're scared of saying yes to something you want. Daniel laughed despite himself. When did you become a therapist? When you became someone who needs one. Emma grinned, then grew serious again. I mean it, Daddy. I'll be okay. You should fly again. Before Daniel could respond, a commotion erupted near the cafeteria entrance. A group of people had gathered, pointing at something on their phones. One of them looked up, saw Daniel, and his eyes widened. That's him! That's the guy from the plane! Suddenly everyone was looking. Phones came out. A woman approached hesitantly. Excuse me, are you the passenger who landed the plane? Daniel felt the walls closing in. He stood quickly, taking Emma's hand. We need to go. They slipped out through a side door, but the damage was done. As they walked back toward the temporary housing where passengers were being kept until transport could be arranged, Daniel could feel the weight of attention settling onto his shoulders. By noon, the story had broken globally. Passengerland's crippled jet saves hundreds. Hero pilot emerges from retirement for dramatic rescue. The headlines grew more sensational by the hour. Daniel's phone rang constantly. News organizations, book publishers, movie producers. He ignored them all. What he couldn't ignore was the knock on their temporary housing door that evening. He opened it to find a woman in an expensive suit, her expression carefully neutral. Mr. Hayes? My name is Victoria Carr. I represent Whitmore and Associates, legal counsel for several of the passengers aboard Flight 447. Daniel's stomach turned to ice. What can I do for you? Victoria's smile was sharp. May I come in? He stepped aside, and she entered the small room, her gaze taking in everything with practiced efficiency. Emma sat on one of the beds, her tablet playing cartoons on mute. Mr. Hayes, I'll be direct. My clients are grateful to be alive. However, They're also traumatized by what happened last night, the terror they experienced, the injuries some sustained during the landing, the ongoing psychological impact. What does this have to do with me? You made decisions in that cockpit that put everyone at risk. The runway excursion, the hard landing, the choice to divert to a shorter runway instead of continuing to Shannon where facilities were better equipped to handle the emergency. Daniel's hands curled into fists. Those decisions saved lives. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is that an unlicensed, uncertified individual took control of an aircraft and made choices that resulted in unnecessary danger and trauma. I see. And your clients want what, exactly? Victoria's smile widened. Compensation for their suffering, for the terror, for the ongoing therapy they'll need. And they believe that compensation should come from the person who put them through it. You're threatening to sue me. Also, I'm informing you that my clients are exploring their legal options. The absurdity of it struck Daniel like a physical blow. He'd saved these people's lives, and now they wanted to destroy his for doing it. Get out. Victoria's eyebrows rose. Mr. Hayes, get out now. She stood smoothly, collecting her briefcase. You'll be hearing from us formally within the week. I'd suggest you retain legal counsel. After she left, Daniel stood frozen in the middle of the room, his mind reeling. Emma approached quietly, slipping her hand into his. Daddy, what's wrong? He looked down at her, this innocent child who'd already lost so much. How could he explain that the world punished heroism as often as it rewarded it? That doing the right thing sometimes meant becoming a target? Nothing, sweetheart, just adult problems. But even as he said it, Daniel knew the truth. The investigation wasn't over. The lawsuits were just beginning. And the choice he'd made in that cockpit, the choice to step up, to take control, to save everyone he could, might cost him everything he had left. The question was whether it had been worth it. He looked at Emma's trusting face and knew the answer. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Whatever came next, he'd face it the same way he'd faced that dying aircraft in the darkness over the Atlantic, with courage born of love, with determination forged in loss, and with the absolute certainty that some choices transcend consequences. The media found them within 48 hours. Daniel stood at the window of their hotel room in Boston. Transatlantic had flown them home on the first available flight, and watched the news vans accumulate on the street below like circling vultures. Emma sat cross-legged on the bed behind him, oblivious to the chaos, her attention focused on a coloring book Mrs. Patterson had mailed to their hotel with a note that simply read, "For the bravest girl I know." His phone buzzed for the 100th time that morning. Another unknown number. He silenced it without looking. "They're not going to leave us alone, are they?" Emma asked without looking up from her coloring. Daniel turned from the window. Probably not for a while. "Are we famous now?" "I don't want to be famous." Emma selected a purple crayon with careful deliberation. "Mrs. Patterson says that sometimes we don't get to choose what happens to us. We only get to choose how we handle it. Mrs. Patterson is a very wise woman. She also sent me her banana bread recipe and said you should learn to make it, because I deserve homemade treats." Emma glanced up with a mischievous smile. "I agree with that part too." Despite everything, Daniel laughed. The sound felt foreign after 2 days of lawyers, investigators, and mounting dread. He crossed to the bed and sat beside his daughter, examining her artwork. She was coloring a picture of an airplane, though she'd given it rainbow wings and a smiling face on the nose. "That's pretty creative." "I'm making it happy. Real planes are too scary." Daniel's chest tightened. "Are you scared of flying now?" Emma considered the question with the seriousness she applied to all important matters. "A little. But you were there, so it was okay. If you weren't there, I'd be really scared." "Emma, about flying?" A sharp knock interrupted him. Daniel tensed, but the voice that came through the door was familiar. "Daniel, it's Richard Brennan. I have someone with me I think you should meet." Daniel opened the door to find the transatlantic CEO standing beside a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. The stranger extended his hand. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Robert Mitchell, former captain, 40 years with various carriers, now retired and working as an aviation safety consultant. Mr." Brennan asked me to review the data from Flight 447. Daniel shook his hand warily. And? And I'd like to talk to you about what happened in that cockpit. May we come in? Daniel glanced back at Emma, who'd set aside her coloring to watch the adults with curious eyes. Give us a few minutes? Brennan nodded. We'll wait in the lobby. Take your time. After they left, Daniel knelt in front of Emma. I need to go talk to these men about the flight. Will you be okay here for a little while? Can I order room service? Don't push your luck. Can I watch a movie? Yes, but nothing scary. Emma threw her arms around his neck. You're going to be okay, Daddy. I know you are. He held her tight, drawing strength from her certainty. When did you become the parent in this relationship? When you started needing one. She pulled back and patted his cheek with mock sympathy. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone you're scared. My secret's safe with you? Always. Daniel found Brennan and Mitchell in a quiet corner of the hotel restaurant, a pot of coffee already on the table between them. Mitchell gestured to an empty chair. Sit, please. I promise this won't take long. Daniel sat, accepting the coffee cup Mitchell poured for him. Brennan remained silent, letting Mitchell take the lead. I've spent the last 2 days analyzing the cockpit voice recorder data, the flight data recorder, and the maintenance logs from the aircraft, Mitchell began. I've also interviewed First Officer Chen, Captain Morrison, and several of the flight attendants. I wanted to understand exactly what happened up there. And what did you conclude? Mitchell's expression was unreadable. That you violated approximately 14 different regulations, made at least 6 decisions that could be considered reckless by someone who wasn't there, and displayed a level of arrogance about your own abilities that should probably concern everyone involved. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Mitchell's face broke into a slight smile. I also concluded that you're one of the finest pilots I've encountered in 4 decades of aviation, and that every single person on that aircraft owes you their life. The tension in Daniel's shoulders released fractionally. I don't understand. Let me be clear about something, Mr. Hayes. The decisions you made were unconventional. They violated protocol. They bypassed normal authority structures, and they were absolutely, unquestionably correct. Mitchell leaned forward, his voice intense. I've run the scenarios through our simulators. I've had our best pilots attempt the same approach with the same failures. Do you know how many of them successfully landed that aircraft? How many? None. Not one. The aircraft was unflyable by any conventional measure. The fact that you got it on the ground at all is remarkable. The fact that everyone survived is miraculous. Brennan spoke up. I asked Robert to conduct this review independently because I needed to know the truth. Not the media version, not the lawyer's version. The technical truth about what happened. And the truth is, Mitchell continued, that Flight 447 should have been a catastrophic loss. The hydraulic failures, the degraded flight controls, the limited runway, any one of those factors makes survival unlikely. All 3 together should have been impossible. But you didn't accept impossible. You worked the problem, adapted to changing conditions, and brought everyone home. First Officer Chen brought everyone home. I just helped. Stop. Mitchell's voice carried command. I've listened to the cockpit recordings. I heard Chen falling apart up there. His breathing was erratic. His voice was breaking. He was seconds away from complete panic when you entered that cockpit. You didn't just help. You took command of a situation spiraling toward disaster and pulled it back from the edge. He asked for help. I answered. And in answering, you saved 183 lives. Mitchell pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. This is my official report to the European Aviation Safety Agency. It concludes that your actions were justified, necessary, and executed with exceptional skill. It recommends no punitive action against you or First Officer Chen. Daniel opened the folder, scanning the dense technical language. Between the jargon and data tables, Mitchell's conclusion was clear. Daniel Hayes had performed exactly as any reasonable pilot should have under the circumstances. The lawsuit, Daniel said quietly. Does this help with that? Brennan and Mitchell exchanged glances. Brennan spoke carefully. Victoria Carr represents a vocal minority of passengers. Most people are grateful. But if you are looking for someone to blame for their trauma, and you're an easy target because you're not protected by the airline's legal structure. So I'm exposed. Potentially. But we're not going to let you face this alone. Brennan's voice was firm. Transatlantic is providing you with full legal representation. Our lawyers will handle Carr's firm. This won't cost you a cent. Why would you do that? Because it's the right thing to do, and because I meant what I said about wanting you to fly for us. Can't have our future pilots buried in frivolous lawsuits. Daniel set down the report. I haven't agreed to that. Not yet, but you will. Mitchell smiled. I've seen the way you talk about that flight. The precision in your recall, the clarity of your decision-making process. That's not someone who's done with aviation. That's someone who's been starving for it and just got their first meal in years. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Daniel had been trying not to acknowledge the truth that Mitchell had seen immediately. That being in that cockpit, fighting that aircraft, making those impossible choices, had awakened something in him that 4 years of deliberate burial hadn't killed. I have a daughter to think about. Emma. Brennan nodded. 7 years old, smart as a whip, according to the flight attendants who spent time with her. Lost her mother 3 years ago, and probably needs her father to be whole again, more than she needs him to be safe. You don't know what she needs. You're right. But I know what my kids needed when I was falling apart after my divorce. They needed me to find myself again, to remember who I was before the pain, to show them that life goes on and joy is still possible. Brennan's expression softened. Emma needs you alive, yes, but she also needs you to be more than a ghost going through the motions. Daniel thought about Emma's words in the cafeteria, about how she'd rather have a happy father who flew than a sad one who stayed grounded, about how she'd noticed his longing every time an aircraft passed overhead. I need to think about this. Fair enough. Mitchell stood, collecting his briefcase. But while you're thinking, consider this. The aviation community needs pilots like you. Not just for the technical skills, though those are clearly exceptional, but for the judgment, the courage, the ability to make hard calls under pressure. Those qualities are rare. Walking away from them is a waste. After they left, Daniel sat alone with his coffee and Mitchell's report. He read through it carefully, absorbing the technical analysis, the simulator results, the interviews with crew members. Every page confirmed what he'd known in his gut. He'd made the right calls, executed them properly, achieved the best possible outcome under nightmare conditions. But the report also contained something else. In the appendix, Mitchell had included a section titled Psychological Assessment of Command Decisions. Daniel read it with growing discomfort. Subject demonstrates classic indicators of post-traumatic avoidance behavior, career abandonment following personal tragedy, deliberate isolation from aviation community, suppression of natural aptitude and training. However, crisis response suggests that core identity remains intact beneath defensive mechanisms. Recommendation: psychological evaluation and support if subject chooses to return to professional aviation. Daniel closed the folder with more force than necessary. He didn't need a report to tell him he'd been running from himself for 4 years. He knew it. He just didn't know if he was ready to stop running. His phone buzzed. This time, he looked at the screen. The number was local, and something made him answer. Mr. Hayes, this is James Morrison, Captain Morrison, from Flight 447. Daniel straightened in his chair. Captain Morrison, how are you feeling? Like I got kicked by a horse, but the doctors say I'll make a full recovery. Heart attack was relatively minor, all things considered. I'm calling because I wanted to speak with you personally. You don't need to thank me, I'm just glad. I'm not calling to thank you, son. I'm calling to tell you that I testified to the investigation board this morning. Morrison's voice was strong despite his ordeal. I told them that what you did in my cockpit was the single finest piece of flying I've witnessed in 35 years as a pilot. Daniel's throat tightened. Sir, I appreciate that, but let me finish. I also told them that if I'd been conscious and able to fly, I'm not certain I could have done better. That approach, that landing, with those system failures, it was textbook crisis management executed by someone with exceptional skill and ice-cold nerves. You should be commended, not investigated. The investigation isn't about commendation. It's about determining what happened and why. Screw the investigation. Morrison's voice hardened. I'm talking about the lawsuit, about Victoria Carr and her ambulance-chasing colleagues trying to crucify you for saving lives. I want you to know that I've submitted a statement to the court on your behalf. I'm willing to testify if it goes to trial, And I'm personally calling every passenger I can reach to tell them exactly what happened in that cockpit and why they should be ashamed of themselves for going after you." Daniel found himself smiling despite the gravity of the conversation. "That's very kind of you, but you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Because if this lawsuit succeeds, if they punish you for doing what needed to be done, then we're sending a message to every potential Good Samaritan in aviation that helping means risking everything. That's wrong. That's dangerous, and I won't stand for it." "Thank you, Captain. That means more than you know." "Call me James." "And Daniel? Come back to the sky. We need pilots with your instincts. Come back where you belong." The call ended, leaving Daniel staring at his phone with a mixture of emotions he couldn't quite untangle. Pride, fear, longing, resistance, all of it swirling together into something that felt almost like hope. He returned to the room to find Emma exactly where he'd left her, though now she was watching a nature documentary about dolphins with rapt attention. "They're so smart," she informed him without looking away from the screen. "Yalmoshikin. They have their own language and they help each other when someone's hurt." "Sounds familiar." Now she looked at him. "Are you okay?" "I'm getting there." "Did the men say nice things or mean things?" "Nice things, mostly. They think I did the right thing on the plane." Emma nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already known. "Good. Because you did." The next few days passed in a blur of legal meetings, media requests that Daniel refused, and mounting pressure from all sides. The lawsuit moved forward despite Captain Morrison's efforts. Victoria Carr proved to be relentless, painting Daniel as a reckless vigilante who'd endangered everyone for a hero complex. The airline's lawyers were confident they'd prevail, but the process itself was exhausting. Depositions, statements, endless questions about decisions made in split seconds under impossible conditions. Daniel found himself second-guessing choices he'd been certain about in the moment. Then the tide began to shift. It started with a video posted to social media by a passenger named Marcus Webb, a tech entrepreneur who'd been in business class. He'd filmed a shaky testimonial on his phone from his living room, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to talk about Flight 447 and the man some people are trying to sue. Daniel Hayes didn't have to help us. He was a passenger, just like everyone else. He could have stayed in his seat with his daughter and hoped for the best. But when the call came, he answered. And because he answered, I'm here making this video instead of at the bottom of the Atlantic. My wife is here. My 2-year-old son is here. We're alive because one man was brave enough to step up when everything was falling apart." So to anyone thinking about joining that lawsuit, think about who you're attacking. You're going after the only reason you're still breathing. The video went viral within hours. Millions of views, thousands of comments, most of them expressing outrage at the lawsuit. Other passengers began posting their own testimonials. The flight attendants released a joint statement praising Daniel's actions. Even the Portuguese government issued a commendation for his role in preventing a disaster on their soil. The court of public opinion swung decisively in Daniel's favor. A week after the incident, Victoria Carr's firm quietly dropped the lawsuit. No explanation, no apology. Just a terse statement about pursuing other avenues of redress. The relief Daniel felt was profound but incomplete. The lawsuit was over, but the question remained, what came next? He found himself standing in a flight simulator at Transatlantic's training facility in Atlanta, Brennan beside him, Emma watching from the observation deck above. "This is a 787 sim," Brennan explained. "Same aircraft you landed at Lodges. I thought you might want to try it without the life or death pressure." Daniel looked at the cockpit, identical to the one he'd occupied during the longest 40 minutes of his life. His hands trembled slightly. "I don't know if I can." "Then don't. Walk away right now, and I'll never mention it again." Brennan's voice was gentle. "But if there's any part of you that wants to know if you still have it, if you can still do this thing you were born to do, then step into that seat and find out." Daniel glanced up at the observation deck. Emma pressed her hands against the glass, giving him a thumbs up and a grin that said she believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. He climbed into the left seat. Brennan took the right seat, running through the startup procedures with practiced ease. The simulator came to life around them, instruments glowing, screens displaying the virtual sky. "Okay," Brennan said. "Let's start simple. Straight and level flight. Get a feel for the controls. For the next hour, Daniel flew. Simple maneuvers at first, then increasingly complex procedures. Approaches, landings, emergencies. Brennan threw scenarios at him, testing his responses, pushing his limits. And Daniel met every challenge with growing confidence. His hands remembered what his mind had tried to forget. The muscle memory remained, encoded so deeply that 4 years of absence couldn't erase it. More than that, the joy returned. The pure pleasure of controlling a machine in 3 dimensions, of solving problems in real time, of dancing with physics and aerodynamics, and making something massive and complex respond to the lightest touch. When they finally shut down the simulator, Brennan was grinning. You're rusty in places, but the fundamentals are solid, better than solid. With focused retraining, you could be fully certified within 6 months. Daniel sat in the silent cockpit, his heart still racing from the final approach they'd just completed. I forgot how much I missed this. I know, I could tell from watching you, you came alive up here. But Emma is upstairs cheering for you. I've been watching her watch you. She's not scared of you flying, Daniel. She's excited about it. She wants you to be happy. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling something fundamental shift inside him. The fear was still there, the worry about leaving Emma alone, the trauma of losing Sarah. But underneath it, stronger than he'd realized, was the truth Emma had seen all along. He belonged in the sky, not because he was running from something, but because it was where he was meant to be, where his skills, his training, his very nature aligned with purpose. He opened his eyes and looked at Brennan. Tell me about that job offer, the real details, not the sales pitch. Brennan's smile widened. First, we get you retrained and recertified. Full course? No shortcuts. You'll need to learn the 787 systems properly, not just survive with them. 6 months of ground school and simulator time, paid in full by the airline. And after certification? Reserve status initially. You'll be on call but not scheduled for regular routes. That gives you flexibility with Emma's schedule. As you get comfortable and she gets older, we can discuss moving to a regular line if you want it. What about pay? Reserve pilots make about $70,000 base plus hourly for actual flight time. It's less than active pilots, but you're not flying full schedules. As you move up, the numbers improve significantly. Daniel did the math. It was less than he'd made before quitting aviation, but substantially more than his IT support job paid. And it came with something no salary could measure, the chance to reclaim himself. I need to talk to Emma. Of course. Take all the time you need. Daniel found his daughter in the observation lounge, her face pressed against the glass as she watched another simulator pilot work through maneuvers below. That was so cool. Emma bounced on her toes as he approached. You were really good up there. Even I could tell. And I don't know anything about flying. Daniel sat beside her, pulling her into his lap. Emma, I need to ask you something serious. And I need you to be completely honest with me. Her expression sobered. Okay. If I started flying again, really flying, as a job, how would you feel about that? Emma looked at him with those gray eyes that saw everything. Would you be happy? I think I would be. Yes. Then I'd feel good about it. Even though it means I'd be away sometimes, that I couldn't always be there for every school event or every bedtime. Emma took his face in her small hands, mimicking the gesture he'd done with her 1,000 times. Daddy, you've been at every school thing and every bedtime for 3 whole years. You've been the best dad ever, but I see how you look at planes. I hear you talking about flying with that man down there. You sound different. You sound like you. What if something happened to me? What if something happens to you driving me to school, or walking down the stairs, or just existing? Emma's logic was relentless. You can't stop living because you're scared of dying. You taught me that. I did? When I didn't want to go to dance class because I was scared I'd mess up. You said being scared is okay, but letting scared win is not okay. So don't let scared win, Daddy. Fly. Daniel pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. How had this small person become so wise? How had she learned to see through his defenses and speak the truths he needed to hear? I love you so much, he whispered. I know. That's why I'm not worried. You'll always come home to me, And even if something bad happened someday, I'd know it was because you were being who you're supposed to be. That's important. Daniel pulled back to look at her. When did you grow up? I've always been grown up. You just didn't notice because I'm short. He laughed, the sound breaking through the last of his resistance. The decision crystallized in that moment, not as something he was forcing himself to do, but as something that had always been inevitable. He found Brennan waiting patiently in the hallway. I'll do it, Daniel said. The retraining, the certification, all of it. I want to fly again. Brennan extended his hand. Welcome back to aviation, Captain Hayes. I'm not a captain. Not yet, but you will be. That night, Daniel lay in bed in their hotel room, Emma asleep in the next bed over, and allowed himself to imagine the future. Not with fear, not with guilt, but with something approaching excitement. 6 months of training, learning the systems, mastering the procedures, becoming the kind of pilot who could handle anything thrown at him. Then back to the flight deck, back to the sky, back to where he belonged. And Emma would be okay, more than okay. She'd have a father who was complete again, who'd found his way back to himself, who'd learned that loving someone didn't mean locking yourself away from everything that gave life meaning. His phone buzzed with a text from First Officer Michael Chen, who'd been cleared by the investigation and was back in training to regain his confidence. Heard you're coming back to the sky. About time. The world needs more pilots like you. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. Daniel typed back. The world needs more pilots like you. Never forget, you brought us home. I just helped with the parking. Another message came through, this one from an unknown number. Daniel opened it cautiously. Mr. Hayes, this is Margaret Chen from EASA. Wanted you to know my final report has been filed. No violations found. Exemplary performance under extreme conditions. Also wanted to say, I'm glad you're flying again. The sky is better with you in it. Daniel set down his phone and stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the past 4 years finally beginning to lift. He'd been running from the sky because he associated it with loss, with the years away from Sarah when he'd been deployed, with the identity he'd abandoned when grief made him unable to function. But the sky hadn't taken anything from him. Fear had. Guilt had. The belief that he didn't deserve joy after losing someone he loved. Emma stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about dolphins and airplanes. Daniel smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow, he'd call his old flight instructor and start mapping out his return to aviation. He'd arrange Emma's care for the training months ahead. He'd begin the process of becoming a pilot again. But tonight, he simply lay in the quiet hotel room and let himself feel something he hadn't felt in 4 years. Hope. 6 months felt like both an eternity and an instant. Daniel stood in the transatlantic training facility's debriefing room, his final certification check complete, his hand still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the simulated emergency scenario he'd just survived. The examiner, a granite-faced woman named Patricia Hollis, who'd been flying since before Daniel was born, reviewed her notes with maddening slowness. Emma sat in the observation room above, her legs swinging from the chair, her face pressed against the glass. She'd insisted on being there for his final test, had negotiated with her teacher to miss school for the occasion, had promised Daniel she'd be his good luck charm just like she'd been on Flight 447. Mr. Hayes? Patricia finally looked up from her clipboard. In 30 years of examining pilots, I've seen every kind of candidate. The overconfident ones who think they know everything, the terrified ones who second-guess every decision, the competent ones who do everything by the book and nothing more. Daniel's stomach knotted. Here it came, the rejection, the acknowledgement that he'd been fooling himself thinking he could come back after 4 years away. Patricia's stern expression cracked into the smallest smile. You're none of those. You're something I see maybe once or twice in a career. A natural. Someone who doesn't just fly aircraft but understands them at an instinctive level. The kind of pilot who makes the right decision before their conscious mind has finished processing the problem. She extended her hand. Congratulations, Captain Hayes. You're certified on the Boeing 787. Welcome back to the flight deck. The relief that flooded through Daniel nearly buckled his knees. He shook her hand, managing to keep his voice steady. Thank you. I won't let you down. I know you won't. The real question is whether you'll let yourself down. Patricia's gaze sharpened. You've got the skills, you've relearned the systems, but you're still carrying ghosts with you. I see it in the way you hesitate before committing to certain maneuvers, the way you double-check decisions you know are correct. You're flying like a man who's afraid of making a mistake. Isn't everyone afraid of mistakes? There's a difference between healthy caution and paralyzing fear. You need to find your confidence again, not the arrogance you had before. I've read your old training records. You were cocky as hell back then, but the quiet certainty that you know what you're doing and trust yourself to do it. Daniel nodded slowly. I'm working on it. Work faster. You're too good to be held back by your own demons. Patricia gathered her materials. Oh, and Hayes, your daughter has been making faces at me through the glass for the past 20 minutes. You might want to rescue her before she gives herself a headache. Emma practically flew down the stairs when Daniel emerged, launching herself into his arms with enough force to make him stagger backward. You passed! I knew you would! Mrs. Hollis looked scary, but I could tell she liked you. How could you tell? She smiled. Just a tiny bit, but I saw it. Mrs. Patterson says you can tell everything about people by their smiles, and Mrs. Hollis's smile said she thought you were good at flying. Daniel laughed, spinning her around. When did Mrs. Patterson become your life advisor? We email. She sends me recipes and advice. I send her pictures of you looking stressed, and she tells me how to make you less grumpy. I'm not grumpy. Emma gave him a look that said she saw right through him. You're grumpy when you're worried, but you don't have to be worried anymore because you passed. Now you can really fly again. Now I can really fly again, Daniel echoed, and the words felt like a promise to himself. The first months of reserve status were easier than Daniel had anticipated. The calls came irregularly. A sick pilot here, an unexpected mechanical delay there, gaps in the schedule that needed filling. He'd fly 2 or 3 legs, then have days at home with Emma. The rhythm worked, giving him time to rebuild his confidence while maintaining the life they'd created. Emma adapted with the resilience of children everywhere. She made friends with the neighbor, Mrs. Chen, different Chen, she'd clarified solemnly, who watched her when Daniel had overnight trips. She learned to video call him in hotel rooms across the country, showing him her homework and telling him about her day with the assumption that he'd always be available to listen. And he was. Even when exhaustion pulled at him, even when the weight of responsibility felt crushing, he answered every call, listened to every story, reminded her that distance didn't diminish love. 3 months into his return to flying, Daniel was deadheading home to Boston after a trip to Seattle when he recognized a familiar face in the airport terminal. First Officer Michael Chen sat at a gate across the concourse, his uniform crisp, his posture confident in a way it hadn't been that night over the Atlantic. Daniel changed course, approaching from the side. Officer Chen, fancy meeting you here. Michael looked up, and his face broke into a genuine smile. Captain Hayes, I heard you got certified. How's it going? Good. Still getting my legs back under me, but it feels right. Daniel gestured to the empty seat beside Michael. Mind if I join you? Please do. I've got an hour before boarding. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the flow of travelers around them, families reuniting, business people rushing between connections, the eternal rhythm of airport life. I wanted to thank you, Michael said finally, for what you said during the investigation, about me keeping the aircraft flying, about my performance being solid despite the circumstances. Your testimony carried weight. It's part of why they reinstated my certification without additional training requirements. I told the truth. You did good work that night, Michael. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I've been in therapy. Michael's voice was quiet, working through what happened. The fear, the panic, the feeling that I failed everyone. Did it help? It's helping. My therapist says I have PTSD from the incident, which feels dramatic for someone who survived just fine. But she explained that trauma isn't about the outcome. It's about the experience. And the experience of thinking you're about to kill everyone on your aircraft while being powerless to stop it, that leaves marks. Daniel understood that truth in his bones. Are you still flying? Just got back on the line last month. Short domestic routes for now, building back up. It's terrifying every time I sit in that seat. But it's also the only thing that makes sense. I tried to imagine doing anything else, and I couldn't. Flying is who I am. I know the feeling. Michael glanced at him with sudden intensity. Do you ever think about that night? About how close we came? Every day. Sometimes I dream about it, the warnings, the failing systems, the runway coming up too fast. I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I made the wrong call somewhere. Did you make the wrong call? Daniel considered the question with the honesty it deserved. I made the best calls I could with the information I had. Could someone else have done it differently? Maybe. Better? I don't know. But everyone lived, and that's the only metric that matters. Victoria Carr didn't think so. Victoria Carr was looking for a payday and a headline. She didn't care about truth or justice, just money and publicity. Michael's expression hardened. She reached out to me, after the lawsuit against you fell apart. Wanted me to sue the airline for putting me in an unsafe position, for not training me adequately, for a dozen other things that were really just ways to blame someone for a mechanical failure no one could have predicted. What did you say? I told her that if she ever contacted me again, I'd report her to the Bar Association for harassment. Then I hung up. Michael's smile was fierce. She's still trying to find passengers willing to sue someone. Last I heard, she's down to 3 clients and none of the claims are going anywhere. Good. Maybe she'll learn that not everything can be turned into a lawsuit. Don't count on it. People like her see tragedy as opportunity. Michael checked his watch. I should start heading to the gate. But Daniel, can I ask you something? Of course. That moment when you walked into the cockpit, when you saw how bad things were you scared? Daniel met his eyes. Terrified. More scared than I've ever been in my life. But you didn't show it. You were calm, focused, completely in control. That wasn't courage, Michael. That was compartmentalization. I shoved the fear into a box, locked it away, and told myself I'd deal with it later. Then later came, and I fell apart for about 3 days straight. Michael absorbed this confession. I think I needed to hear that even you were scared. It makes my fear feel less like failure. Fear is information, not failure. It tells you the stakes are real. What matters is what you do with it. They stood, and Michael extended his hand. Thank you for everything, for that night, for the investigation, for this conversation. You gave me my career back. Daniel shook his hand firmly. You gave yourself your career back. I just helped you see you deserved it. As Michael walked toward his gate, Daniel felt something shift inside him. He'd been so focused on his own recovery, his own journey back to the sky, that he hadn't fully processed the impact of that night on everyone else. Michael, carrying his trauma and fighting through it. Captain Morrison, recovering from his heart attack and returning to limited flight duties. The passengers, some celebrating their survival, while others struggled with the psychological aftermath. One night had rippled through hundreds of lives, changing trajectories, altering perspectives, proving that ordinary moments could transform into crucibles that revealed who people truly were. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma, sent during her lunch period at school. Mrs. Patterson says you should come to dinner next weekend. She wants to meet you in person and make sure you're eating enough vegetables. Can we go, please? She promised to make her famous lasagna. Daniel smiled, typing back quickly. Tell Mrs. Patterson we'd be honored. Yay, she also wants to know if you have a girlfriend because her niece is single and very nice. Tell Mrs. Patterson to mind her own business. Too late. I already told her you don't have a girlfriend and you spend all your time either flying or with me. She says that's sweet, but unhealthy. Are you unhealthy, Daddy? Daniel laughed out loud in the middle of the concourse, earning curious looks from passing travelers. I'm perfectly healthy. Now go back to learning things. Love you. Love you more. Fly safe. The dinner with Mrs. Patterson the following weekend proved to be both delightful and overwhelming. The elderly woman had somehow transformed from a kind stranger on a plane into Emma's unofficial grandmother, complete with opinions about Daniel's eating habits, his sleeping schedule, his social life, and his general state of well-being. You're too thin, she declared, ladling a second helping of lasagna onto his plate despite his protests. Pilots need to keep their strength up, and you have shadows under your eyes. Are you sleeping enough? I'm sleeping fine, Mrs. Patterson. Call me Dorothy. And you're not sleeping fine if you have shadows. Emma tells me you have nightmares sometimes. Daniel shot his daughter a look. Emma concentrated very hard on her garlic bread, suddenly fascinated by its texture. They're manageable, Daniel said carefully. Dorothy set down the serving spoon with a decisive clink. Daniel Hayes, I'm 73 years old. I've buried a husband, raised 3 children through various crises, and survived a plane crash thanks to you. I've earned the right to speak plainly. So here it is. You saved my life and the lives of everyone on that aircraft. You're a hero, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. But being a hero doesn't mean you don't need help dealing with what happened. I'm in therapy, Daniel admitted. Have been since a month after the incident. Dorothy's expression softened. Good. That's good. And it's helping? Slowly. Some days are better than others. That's all any of us can ask for. Progress, not perfection. Dorothy reached across the table and patted his hand. You're a good man, Daniel, a good father, a good pilot. Don't let the hard days convince you otherwise. Emma had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. Mrs. Patterson, Dorothy, tells me that brave people aren't the ones who never get scared. They're the ones who get scared and keep going anyway. Like you, Daddy. Daniel's throat tightened. Is that so? That's absolutely so, Dorothy confirmed. And speaking of keeping going, I've taken the liberty of inviting someone else to join us for dessert. I hope you don't mind. Before Daniel could ask who, the doorbell rang. Dorothy bustled off to answer it, leaving Daniel and Emma exchanging confused glances. Dorothy returned with First Officer Michael Chen and an Asian woman in her 30s who bore a striking resemblance to him. Daniel, Emma, this is my neighbor Michael. Yes, different Michael from Officer Chen, though that would be quite the coincidence. And his sister Lisa. Michael mentioned that Officer Chen had spoken highly of you, and when I discovered Lisa works as a trauma therapist specializing in aviation incidents, I thought it might be nice for everyone to meet. Daniel stood, shaking hands with both newcomers, suspecting strongly that Dorothy was less interested in professional connections and more interested in matchmaking. Emma, based on her knowing smile, had apparently been in on the scheme. It's lovely to meet you both, Daniel said diplomatically. Though I suspect Dorothy has ulterior motives beyond professional networking. Lisa laughed, a warm sound that immediately put him at ease. Oh, she absolutely does. She's been trying to set me up with every eligible bachelor in a 3-mile radius since I moved to Boston 6 months ago. I'm sorry if this is awkward. Only moderately awkward, Daniel assured her. I appreciate the effort, even if the execution is a bit obvious. Dorothy means well, and for what it's worth, I genuinely would be interested in talking with you about your experience if you're open to it. Not as a therapist soliciting a client, but as someone who studies how people process traumatic events and return to the situations that traumatize them. They moved to the living room for dessert, Dorothy's famous apple pie, naturally, and the conversation flowed more easily than Daniel had expected. Lisa was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly direct about Dorothy's matchmaking attempts. They talked about aviation, therapy, the challenges of single parenthood. Lisa had a 9-year-old son from a previous relationship, and the strange process of rebuilding life after everything falls apart. Emma and Lisa's son, Marcus, discovered a shared love of nature documentaries and disappeared to watch something about penguins, leaving the adults to talk more freely. The hardest part for most people, Lisa explained, is reconciling the person they were before the trauma with who they've become after. There's a tendency to either idealize the past self or demonize it, neither of which is accurate or helpful. I've definitely demonized my past self, Daniel admitted. The cocky fighter pilot who thought he was invincible, who chose the military over time with his wife because the adrenaline was too addicting, who wasn't there when Sarah needed him most. And now? Now I'm trying to find a middle ground. To take the good parts of who I was, the skills, the confidence, the love of flying, without the arrogance and the misplaced priorities. Lisa nodded thoughtfully. That's healthy. Integration rather than rejection. It's hard work, but it leads to wholeness in a way that denial never can. Are you sure you're not trying to recruit me as a client? Positive. Though if you ever want a recommendation for someone who specializes in aviation-related PTSD, I know several excellent therapists in the area. They talked until late, the evening unfolding with an ease that surprised Daniel. When he and Emma finally left, Dorothy hugged them both fiercely at the door. Thank you for coming. And Daniel? Lisa's a wonderful woman. Smart, kind, understands trauma because she works with it every day. I'm not saying you have to do anything about it, but I am saying that being a devoted father doesn't mean being alone forever. In the car ride home, Emma was uncharacteristically quiet. Daniel glanced over at her. "What's on your mind, kiddo? Do you like Lisa?" "I just met her, but she seems very nice." "She's pretty." "She is." Marcus said his mom doesn't date much because most guys are weird about her having a kid. Daniel pulled into their driveway and turned off the engine, giving Emma his full attention. "Is this your way of asking if I'm going to start dating?" Emma picked at her seatbelt. "Would it be okay if you did?" "What do you mean?" "Would it be okay with Mom if you liked someone else?" The question pierced Daniel's heart. He unbuckled and pulled Emma into his arms, holding her close. "Oh, sweetheart, your mom would want me to be happy. She'd want both of us to have full lives with people who care about us. Loving someone new wouldn't mean I love Mom any less or that I'm forgetting her. I don't want to forget her either. We won't. We'll never forget her. But Emma, your mom was the one who always told me that life is for living. That hiding from joy because you're afraid of pain is the same as being dead already. She'd be furious with me for spending 4 years in a holding pattern, too scared to move forward." Emma pulled back to look at him. "So you're going to ask Lisa out?" "I don't know, maybe. If I do, would you be okay with that?" Emma considered this with her usual seriousness. "I think so. As long as you promise that no matter what, you and me are still the most important team." "That's an easy promise to make. You and me always. Everything else is just extras." "Okay then. You should ask her out. She made you smile a lot tonight. You don't smile like that very often." Daniel realized with a start that Emma was right. He'd smiled more in one evening with Lisa than he had in months. Not the polite smiles he gave strangers or the patient smiles he gave Emma. Real smiles. The kind that came from genuine enjoyment of another person's company. "When did you get so wise about relationships?" "I watch a lot of movies. People fall in love all the time in movies." "Real life is more complicated than movies," Emma grinned. "That's what makes it interesting." The months continued to unfold with increasing momentum. Daniel's confidence grew with each flight. The nightmares became less frequent. He did ask Lisa out, and they began a slow, careful courtship that honored both their past wounds and their present hopes. Emma and Marcus became fast friends, bonding over their shared experience of having single parents trying to navigate the dating world. And then, nearly a year after Flight 447, Daniel received a call that changed everything. "Captain Hayes, this is Richard Brennan. I have a proposition for you." Daniel settled into his desk chair, curiosity piqued. "I'm listening." "Transatlantic is launching a new training program focused on crisis management and decision-making under extreme pressure. We want pilots who've actually faced the impossible and survived, not just academics who've studied it. We want you to help design and teach the program." "I'm not an instructor." "You're a survivor who made split-second decisions that saved hundreds of lives. That's worth more than any teaching certificate. We're offering a significant salary increase, reduced flight hours to accommodate the teaching schedule, and the chance to influence how the next generation of pilots approaches emergencies." Daniel's mind raced. Teaching would mean stability, regular hours, more time with Emma. It would mean turning his trauma into something productive, using the worst night of his life to prepare others for their worst nights. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need. But Daniel, you have a gift for this. Don't let it go to waste." That evening, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with Emma, Lisa, and Marcus, the 4 of them assembled for what had become their weekly dinner together. He explained the offer, watching their reactions carefully. Emma spoke first. "Would you still fly?" "Some, yes, just not as much as now." "Would you be gone less?" "Quite a bit less. I'd have a more regular schedule." Emma and Marcus exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Then Emma turned back to Daniel with a smile. "I think you should do it. You're good at explaining things, and maybe you can teach other pilots to be brave like you were." Lisa reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "She's right. You'd be excellent at it. And selfishly, I'd love to have you around more." Daniel looked at these 3 people who'd become his family. Emma, who'd never stopped believing in him. Lisa, who'd shown him that love could bloom even in scarred soil. Marcus, who'd accepted him without judgment or expectation. A family built not from obligation, but from choice, from the gradual accumulation of shared meals and honest conversations and the simple decision to show up for each other. "Okay," he said, I'll do it. The celebration was immediate and enthusiastic, Emma and Marcus high-fiving while Lisa kissed him soundly. In the joyful chaos, Daniel felt something he'd thought lost forever, a sense of completeness. Not because everything was perfect, but because he'd finally stopped running from himself and accepted that moving forward didn't mean leaving the past behind. It meant carrying it with honor while still making room for the future. The training program launched 3 months later. Daniel stood in front of a classroom of young pilots. Many of them newer than Michael Chen had been that night over the Atlantic, all of them eager to learn from someone who'd actually lived through the scenarios they practiced in simulators. Crisis management, Daniel began, isn't about following a checklist. It's about understanding that when everything is falling apart, the rules are guidelines, and your judgment is what keeps people alive. Today I'm going to tell you about a flight that should have ended in tragedy, but didn't, and I'm going to explain why. He told them about Flight 447, about the failing systems, the impossible choices, the moments when death seemed certain and survival improbable. He told them about fear and courage, about accepting help and giving it, about the responsibility that came with sitting in the left seat. And at the end, he told them the truth that had taken him a year to fully understand. Being a pilot isn't about being fearless. It's about acknowledging fear and flying anyway. It's about recognizing your limits while pushing past them when lives depend on it. It's about understanding that every time you take that seat, you're accepting responsibility for everyone who trusts you to bring them home. The questions came fast after that. Technical questions about the hydraulics, philosophical questions about decision-making, personal questions about how he'd handled the aftermath. Daniel answered them all honestly, holding nothing back, sharing both his triumphs and his failures. After the class, a young woman approached him hesitantly. "Captain Hayes, I wanted to thank you. I've been struggling with confidence issues since a rough landing last year, wondering if I'm cut out for this. But hearing how scared you were, how much you doubted yourself even while doing everything right, it helps. It makes me think maybe I can do this after all." Daniel smiled, remembering Michael Chen's similar confession. "You can absolutely do this. The doubt means you're taking it seriously. Just don't let it paralyze you." "How do you prevent that?" "By remembering why you started flying in the first place. By holding on to the love of it even when fear tries to push it out. And by surrounding yourself with people who believe in you, especially on the days you can't believe in yourself." As the young pilot walked away, Daniel felt the last pieces of his healing click into place. He'd spent years punishing himself for Sarah's death, for not being there, for choosing the sky over her. But Sarah had never asked him to choose. She'd loved him for who he was, pilot and all. She'd understood that the sky was part of his soul, not separate from it. By walking away from aviation, he hadn't honored her memory. He'd diminished it, had become a shadow of the man she'd loved. By coming back, he'd finally done what she would have wanted, lived fully, loved deeply, and used his gifts to make the world a little bit better. That weekend, Daniel took Emma to the small municipal airport where he'd first learned to fly as a teenager. He'd arranged for a rental aircraft, a little Cessna 172 that looked like a toy compared to the 787s he flew professionally. "Where are we going?" Emma asked as he completed the pre-flight inspection. "Up," Daniel said simply. Emma's eyes widened. "Really? You're taking me flying?" "If you want to go, no pressure if you're scared after what happened on Flight 447. Emma was already climbing into the aircraft. "I'm not scared. Not with you flying." They took off into a perfect autumn afternoon, the New England foliage painting the landscape in brilliant reds and golds. Daniel climbed to 3,000 feet and leveled off, pointing out landmarks, explaining how the aircraft worked, answering Emma's endless questions with the patience born of genuine joy. "Can I try?" Emma asked eventually. "Try what?" "Flying. Can I hold the controls?" Daniel hesitated only a moment before placing her small hands on the yoke. "Okay, you've got the aircraft. Keep it level and steady. Feel how she wants to fly herself if you let her?" Emma's face was pure concentration, her tongue poking out slightly between her teeth the way it did when she was focused. The aircraft wobbled slightly under her inexperienced touch, but Daniel's hands hovered nearby, ready to correct if needed. "I'm flying." Emma's voice was filled with wonder. "Daddy, I'm actually flying." "You are. You're a natural." They flew for another hour, trading control back and forth, Emma's confidence growing with each passing minute. When they finally landed and secured the aircraft, Emma threw her arms around Daniel with fierce intensity. "That was the best day ever. Can we do it again?" "Anytime you want, sweetheart." "Do you think Mom would have liked to see me flying?" Daniel's heart squeezed. "I think she'd have been so proud she would have burst, just like I am." Emma pulled back and looked up at him with those gray eyes that held wisdom beyond her years. "You're happy now, aren't you? Really happy, not just pretend happy." Daniel considered the question, looking back over the past year. The terror of Flight 447, the investigation and lawsuit, the slow rebuild of his career and confidence, the unexpected love he'd found with Lisa, the community he'd built with Emma, Marcus, Dorothy, and the growing network of people who'd become his chosen family. The purpose he'd discovered in teaching others to face their fears and fly anyway. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm really happy. For the first time in a long time, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Good. Because you deserve to be happy, Daddy. You saved all those people. You saved me. You deserve good things." They walked to the car hand in hand, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, a commercial jet climbed into the evening sky, its contrail a white line against the darkening blue. Daniel watched it climb and felt no regret, no longing to be anywhere other than where he was. The sky would always be part of him, but it no longer defined him. He was more than a pilot. He was a father, a teacher, a partner, a friend. He was a man who'd faced his demons and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. Who'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear make your decisions. "I love you, Emma," he said softly. "I love you too. Now can we get ice cream? Flying makes me hungry." Daniel laughed, the sound free and genuine. "Ice cream it is." As they drove toward town, Emma chattering about her favorite flavors and whether they should invite Lisa and Marcus to join them, Daniel allowed himself to feel the full weight of gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. The pain of loss would never fully disappear, but it had transformed into something bearable, something that added depth to joy rather than erasing it. He thought about all the people whose lives had intersected with his that night over the Atlantic. Captain Morrison, now medically retired but consulting for the FAA. First Officer Chen, flying confidently again and working through his trauma with professional help. The passengers scattered across the country but connected by the shared experience of survival. Dorothy, who'd adopted Emma as her honorary granddaughter and appointed herself Daniel's guardian angel. Lisa, who'd shown him that opening your heart after loss was an act of courage equal to any cockpit emergency. And Emma, always Emma, the reason he'd pressed that call button, the reason he'd fought so hard to bring everyone home, the reason he'd found the strength to rebuild himself into someone worthy of her love and trust. The sky had called him back, yes, but Emma had been the one to answer. In the end, that made all the difference. The ice cream shop was crowded with families enjoying the weekend, children laughing, parents relaxing, the ordinary magic of everyday life unfolding in a small New England town. Daniel ordered Emma's favorite, chocolate chip with rainbow sprinkles, and watched her attack it with the enthusiasm unique to 7-year-olds. His phone buzzed. A text from Lisa. "Marcus wants to know if Emma can come over tomorrow to work on their science project. Also, I want to know if you can stay for dinner after you drop her off. Also, I might be falling in love with you, and that's terrifying and wonderful, and I needed to tell you." Daniel stared at the message, his heart expanding in his chest. He typed back carefully. "Yes to the project. Yes to dinner. And yes to being terrified and wonderful together. I might be falling too." Emma noticed his expression. "What are you smiling about?" "Just life. The good parts that make the hard parts worthwhile." "That's deep, Daddy." "I learned it from a very wise 7-year-old. Emma grinned, rainbow sprinkles dotting her lips. "I'm 8 now. My birthday was last month." "Right. My very wise 8-year-old. They finished their ice cream as the sun completed its descent, the sky darkening to deep purple. Around them, families gathered their children and headed home, the day winding down into evening routines and bedtime stories and the quiet peace of Saturday nights. Daniel took Emma's hand, sticky with ice cream residue, and walked back to the car. Overhead, the first stars appeared, and somewhere in the distance, another aircraft climbed into the night sky, carrying its own cargo of dreams and hopes and people just trying to get home. Daniel no longer felt the pull to be up there every moment. He was content here, on the ground, with his daughter's hand in his, and the knowledge that tomorrow he'd teach another class of pilots, see Lisa's smile, build a life that honored both who he'd been and who he was becoming. The sky would always be there, waiting. And now, finally, so would he, not as a man running from pain, but as someone who'd learned to carry it with grace while still reaching for joy. Emma tugged his hand. "Daddy, you're doing the staring at nothing thing again." "Sorry, just thinking." "About what?" "About how lucky I am." Emma squeezed his hand. "We're both lucky. We have each other." "We do. Always." They drove home through the quiet streets, the radio playing softly, Emma humming along to songs she didn't know the words to. When they pulled into the driveway, the porch light was on. Daniel had started leaving it on after Sarah died. A beacon saying someone was waiting, someone cared, someone would always welcome him home. Inside, they went through the bedtime routine with practiced ease. Teeth brushed, pajamas on, stories read. Daniel tucked Emma into bed, kissing her forehead the same way he'd done every night since she was born. "Daddy?" Emma's voice was sleepy. "Do you still have the nightmares? About the plane?" "Sometimes, but they're getting better." "When you have them, remember that everyone lived, that you were brave and smart, and everyone got to go home to their families because of you." "I'll remember. Thank you, sweetheart." "And Daddy, I'm really glad you started flying again. You're better when you fly. You're more you." Daniel's throat tightened with emotion. "Get some sleep, baby girl. Love you to the moon. Love you to the stars and back." He left her door cracked open the way she liked it, light from the hallway spilling across her floor. In his own room, he changed into comfortable clothes and stood at the window, looking out at the night sky. Somewhere up there, pilots were navigating the darkness, making decisions, keeping people safe. Tomorrow, he'd help train them to do it better. Tomorrow, he'd build on the foundation he'd created, brick by brick, flight by flight, choice by choice. But tonight, he was simply Daniel Hayes. Father, teacher, survivor. A man who'd found his way back from the edge not because the journey was easy, but because love made it necessary. The sky had called him back. Emma had given him permission to answer, and in answering, he discovered something more valuable than any career or achievement or recognition. He'd found himself again. Not the man he'd been before loss, but someone better. Someone tempered by pain and strengthened by the choice to keep going. Someone who understood that courage wasn't about being unafraid, but about flying anyway. Daniel closed the curtains and climbed into bed, the exhaustion of the day finally catching up to him. But this time, as sleep claimed him, there were no nightmares of failing aircraft or desperate decisions. Instead, he dreamed of flying through clear skies with Emma beside him, both of them laughing, both of them free, both of them exactly where they belonged. Together. Always together. And that was enough.